Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the Ethiopian highlands, somewhere between the rustling eucalyptus groves and the crooked stone churches of the 12th century. You're standing outside a royal court, not one lined with red carpets or powdered wigs, but with flattened reeds, yak hair benches, and the steady hum of bees in the air. There's a smell here that mixes sacred incense with the faint tang of sun-baked cattle hides, and it sticks to your skin like stubborn gossip. This is no ordinary courtroom. Forget gavels and closing arguments. Here the Zagwe kings reign and their justice is half scripture, half sorcery. Your sandals crunch against gravel as you step through the shaded entryway of the open-air court. Monks stand to one side with scrolls, soldiers to the other all muscle and indigo sashes. Everyone watches you but not unkindly, at least not yet. You've somehow found yourself accused of a crime. Don't ask how. Maybe you blinked wrong at a tax collector. Maybe your goat wandered into the bishop's garden. Doesn't really matter, justice here isn't about what you did. It's about how convincingly you can prove you didn't mean it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while we're waiting on the judge to finish his honeyed porridge, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your seat well. It's more of a polished rock and wipe the dust from your robe. Around you, villagers whisper beneath their breath. A priest chants low syllables in Ge'ez, the old liturgical tongue, while another draws a chalk spiral on the ground before the throne. This is the space where truth unravels, or gets stitched up again depending on how your luck holds. Now, here's the first thing you need to know about justice in 12th century Ethiopia. It's intensely theatrical. Not because anyone's trying to be dramatic, but because, frankly, there's no written record to fall back on. Your case will be remembered by how well it was performed. And right now, the spotlight is on you. The judge, or Afe Nagast, meaning mouth of the king, finally appears swaying slightly in his embroidered sandals. He looks more like a sleepy uncle than a stern official. But don't be fooled. Behind that yawn is a mind sharper than the ceremonial spear he leans on. He doesn't speak, not yet. Instead, he taps a servant's shoulder who brings out a massive conical drum, wrapped in cowhide and stained with something dark and old. The judgment drum. Yes, really. Court officially begins when the drum is struck and does not split. If it cracks or breaks, the trial must be postponed until a proper fast has been held. Bad luck, you see. Maybe a sign the gods are annoyed. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a way to buy time before a tough verdict. The drummer approaches, lifts his carved mallet, and strikes. A deep, honeyed boom rolls across the courtyard. No crack. You're good to go. The judge raises one eyebrow and asks the standard question. Did your goat enter the bishop's garden by its own will, or were you asleep at your gate? You fumble through a nervous excuse, something about wind and how goats are known for rebellion. The audience chuckles. One monk smirks into his sleeve. And here's where it gets fun. You're not defending yourself with facts. Not exactly. You'll be subject to performative indicators of truth. If your nose runs during questioning, it's considered a bad sign. If a bird lands nearby and preens itself, very good. Especially if it's a hoopoe. You sit very still. Try not to blink. The priest approaches and offers a bowl of smoked frankincense to clear the spirits. You inhale. Bad idea. Your eyes water uncontrollably. The crowd murmurs. But wait, it's not over. Not even close. Your neighbor steps forward as your character witness. He claims your goat has always been adventurous. This somehow helps. The judge gives a slow, sardonic nod. Suddenly, the man beside you sneezes. 3 times. Everyone gasps. This apparently is meaningful. A clerk whispers to the judge. The judge frowns. The drum is struck again once, twice. Your trial is paused. There may be divine interference. Possibly a restless ancestor. You're escorted to a side bench. A boy offers you sour beer in a gourd shell. You sip. It tastes like fermented regret. The priest begins to chant again. You stare up at the fig tree shading the court. Its roots twist like slow-moving snakes across the red dirt. Somewhere in the branches, a monkey watches everything with the bored air of someone who's seen this all before. In this court, truth is not extracted. It is performed guessed at, hinted through omens, and sometimes heard in the chirp of a swallow. And you new to all this are only beginning to understand the peculiar elegance of Ethiopian justice. You're not just on trial, you're on stage. And the audience loves a twist. The trial resumes just after a priest finishes burning a bundle of dried sage near the drum. Not for you specifically, he says it's for atmospheric clarity, which may be a euphemism for removing that sneeze jinx from earlier. Either way, the sage crackles as the smoke curls lazily upward, and someone mutters that it smells like Tuesday. You return to your polished rock seat, and a rooster crows from somewhere behind the court's reed fence. That's a good sign, someone whispers, but only if it's the second crow of the day. Third crow. Terrible omen. It's all about timing here. And speaking of timing, yours is about to run out. The judge leans forward, now expression unreadable, and requests the presentation of your chosen ordeal. Yes, you heard that right. In 12th century Ethiopia, the legal system occasionally employed ordeals not out of cruelty, but because the assumption was simple: God protects the innocent. If you endure the ordeal without harm, you're telling the truth. If not, well, perhaps it's time to start apologizing in a really sincere tone of voice. But before the ordeal begins, there's one more surprise. You're handed a small square of embroidered cloth, no larger than your palm. On it is a crude lion stitched in ochre thread. This is your truth cloth. You must hold it during the ordeal and whisper your defense 3 times into it. Think of it as a very early voice recorder, except made by your aunt. The crowd falls silent. A soldier brings forward a shallow brass basin filled with water, and beside it a smooth black stone no bigger than a mango. You swallow. This is called the stone truth test. You must retrieve the stone using only your forearm, no splashing, no hesitation. If you reach too quickly, you're clearly trying to cheat. Too slowly, you're stalling. The trick, as they say, is in the grace. Now don't worry, the water is warm. Because it's been sitting in the sun since dawn, there are no hidden snakes, no boiling cauldrons. This isn't medieval France. Here the ordeal is symbolic, at least at first. You kneel beside the basin. The sun hits your back like a friendly warning. Someone coughs. You close your eyes, press the lion cloth to your lips, and mutter your defense. It was the wind, and maybe a bit of goat. Then in a single fluid motion, you plunge your arm in and grasp the stone. You hold it aloft. The crowd leans in, your arm unharmed. The priest gives a tiny nod. The ordeal is past, mostly, because here's the twist. There's always a twist. Your ordeal has cleared you of direct guilt? Yes. But your behavior during the pre-ordeal rituals still left energetic concerns according to the court diviner. The frankincense tears, the sneeze. The rooster crowed at the wrong moment. Actually, it was the third crow. The boy counted. So now you must undergo a penitential punishment, not because you're guilty, but because your spirit was out of alignment during the process. Think of it as a mystical parking ticket. The judge consults with a scribe. The verdict: you are to spend 3 days walking barefoot across river pebbles while reciting psalms and gayas. Backwards, at dawn. And here's the kicker: it's not meant to hurt you. It's meant to confuse the spirits who may have caused your misalignment in the first place. If your suffering makes no sense, maybe they'll lose interest. This kind of logic is very popular in mystical justice circles. Historians still argue whether these punishments were legally binding or more of a cultural performance, like a warning shot for the soul. Some believe the Zagwe kings used these rites as social glue rituals that taught humility through controlled discomfort. Others think it was just a good excuse to see if you could chant while stepping on sharp things. Either way, you nod solemnly, as is expected. A court boy hands you a scroll with the appropriate psalms and a small pouch of dried peas for ankle luck. Don't ask. As you walk away from the court scroll tucked under your arm, the villagers slap your shoulder and smile. You've done well, they say. You didn't cry, and the stone didn't bite. That's something. And you stumbling over a prayer while wincing at the thought of those early morning pebbles can't help but wonder if justice here is less about proof and more about poetry. There's a kind of grace in that. The first pebble you step on is unremarkable. It nestles into your heel with only a mild complaint. But the next few are sharp, round, and annoyingly philosophical. They seem to ask, why are you doing this again? The riverbed is dry this season, which helps. It also means the pebbles are sun-warmed, which doesn't help. You shuffle carefully, clutching your psalm scroll like it's a cheat sheet for a very confusing test. The chant spills from your lips, not quite backwards yet, but you're warming up. The rhythm is the hard part. That and the small beetle that insists on marching alongside you like a spiritual supervisor. A few villagers gather on the bank, sipping sour milk and chewing caught leaves. One of them chuckles not unkindly and shouts, "Don't trip on the 23rd Psalm, or your soul will end up in Djibouti." The joke lands softly. Humor is often used to diffuse the discomfort of these peculiar punishments. After all, they're not designed for agony, they're meant to wear you down just enough to think. Think about your place, your choices, your sneeze timing. As the sun lifts higher, your feet begin to object. Small bruises bloom like thoughtful punctuation marks across your soles. But you keep going because, believe it or not, this is the mild category of court-ordered penance, the medium punishments. They involve animals, specifically goats, geese, and once, according to a traveler's journal from the period, a particularly vengeful mule named Araya. Let's take a little detour into that, shall we? One tale preserved in an oral tradition from the Tigray region involves a merchant who was caught exaggerating the weight of his honey jars. A low crime by most standards, but deeply offensive in a land where sweetness was sacred. As punishment, the judge ordered him to be publicly followed by a goose. Just one goose, for 40 days. Everywhere he went, the goose would be there. Court appointed. Fed and supervised by children, of course. The idea was if people saw the goose, they'd know he was guilty of sweet deceit. And the goose. She was trained to honk whenever he tried to sell anything. A living lie detector with feathers. The records don't say whether the man changed his ways, but they do mention that he later became a monk. Possibly at a monastery where geese were strictly forbidden. Historians still argue whether such animal-based penalties were widespread or unique to specific regions. Some suggest they were symbolic proxies, outsourced shame mechanisms, if you will. Others argue they were just effective crowd pleasers. Let's face it, nothing keeps someone honest like a judgmental goose. But let's go back to your riverbed penance. You're halfway through day 2 when the priest reappears, his robe shimmering faintly with sweat and ash. He doesn't interrupt, just stands by the bank, arms crossed, watching your pacing. And then he nods. That's your cue. You may now progress to the second half of your punishment, the repetition of regret. It sounds dramatic, and it kind of is. You must now recite a selected list of your minor sins. Not the big stuff, not the sneeze, but things like interrupting elders or sleeping through market prayers. The list is compiled for you by the scribe who has suspiciously good hearing and a flair for passive-aggressive ink. You unroll the scroll and read, "I regret stepping on my neighbor's mat without greeting. I regret accusing the rooster of theft. I regret bathing upstream during Lent. I regret laughing at the bishop's sandals." You pause. Did you laugh at his sandals? Maybe. They were made of melon rind. A few pebbles later, a child brings you roasted chickpeas and a cup of Tajay honey wine diluted with water. It's not part of the punishment. It's just neighborly. Even in penance, people take care of each other here. As dusk begins to stretch its gold over the hills, your voice softens. The psalms flow more easily. The pebbles don't bite as much. Something shifts not in your feet, but in your spine, your breath. A curious sense of rightness. Maybe the spirits have stopped watching. Maybe they're bored. Or maybe you've aligned just enough with the rhythm of the land. Either way, by the time the last pebble slides beneath your heel, you feel oddly lighter. There's no formal announcement of completion. No trumpet, no dramatic gavel. Just a nod from the boy with the goose scroll and a slice of cold bread placed quietly on a rock. You sit. You eat. You exhale. And in that small pause, that pebble-free moment, you begin to understand the purpose of these peculiar punishments was never simply to correct behavior. It was to reroute the soul, to make the offender walk through discomfort toward awareness. Or at least toward better footing. Because in this world, walking carefully is half the law. Morning returns like an old, slightly judgmental friend. It finds you seated on a shaded stone bench, legs aching pleasantly, mouth tasting faintly of last night's chickpeas. And before your limbs have a chance to remember they're sore, the court bell tolls, not loudly, more like an elderly cow with a copper cold. Still, it's enough to summon you back. Today's proceedings, however, are not yours to bear. Instead, you're here to witness the judgment of another soul, a tax scribe accused of fudging some temple scrolls. Not numbers, mind you. He adjusted the spacing to hide an extra tithe. A spacing scandal. The nerve. You follow the crowd into a wide courtyard shaded by eucalyptus trees and buzzing with sleepy bees. At the center stands the defendant holding a dried calabash bowl above his head, not as protest, but as part of the process. He must remain motionless while the elders argue over his fate. And argue they do. Here's something you didn't expect. Ethiopian court punishments in the 12th century weren't always delivered from on high. They were negotiated, debated, sometimes sung into consensus, and in this case, chanted into existence by three clerics with differing views on appropriate scriptural spacing etiquette. You can't quite follow every line your Ge'ez is rusty, but you catch the general drift. One suggests 3 days of kneeling on lentils. Another counters with mandatory scribe training, which includes rewriting the entire book of Enoch using charcoal on goat hide. A third proposes a public apology shouted from atop a fig tree, with harmonies. Historians still argue whether these community-based decisions reflect egalitarian ideals or merely showcase performative spirituality. Either way, they were deeply participatory. You couldn't sleepwalk through justice here. Someone would hand you a tambourine. Eventually, a consensus emerges. The scribe shall endure the trial of the ink-stained cloak. And just like that, you learn about a new punishment, one rooted in humiliation symbolism and a curious textile tradition. The cloak in question is ceremonial. Once bright red, now more burgundy brown, it's been worn by every deceitful scribe since the reign of King Lalabella's great uncle. Its hem is crusted with decades of spilled ink and tears. It smells faintly of myrrh, regret, and overly ambitious spelling. The punishment. The scribe must wear the cloak for a full market cycle, 7 days without laundering it, while continuing his public duties. Every mistake he makes during that week will be corrected not by him, but by passing school children armed with feathers dipped in salt water. The correction ritual is gently humiliating and slightly itchy. You watch the cloak being placed upon him like a heavy, itchy crown. His shoulders sag immediately as if reminded of every margin he's ever bent. There's no public jeering, just quiet recognition. A few nods, a single cough from the fig tree. As he walks off, you can't help but wonder, would this sort of punishment work today? Imagine a Wall Street analyst made to wear the tie of tricky numbers, or a bureaucrat forced to stamp papers in reverse while school children shout budget categories. Modern parallels aside, you admire the elegance of it, the symbolism, the blend of shame and restoration. Because that's the thing, none of these punishments are terminal. No one's thrown into a pit or shackled to a wheel, well, not in this court anyway. The military tribunals are another story. Here, justice is choreographed to reform, not destroy. Now, don't get too comfortable. You're still not done serving your own sentence. The psalm walking helped. The confession recitation, helpful. But what remains is the sitting of stillness. Sounds relaxing, right? It's not. You are placed on a low wooden platform surrounded by 6 tiny bells suspended from woven papyrus stalks. You must sit cross-legged, hands on knees, and remain entirely still for the duration of a sand timer's fall, roughly 2 hours. Every time a bell rings, your timer resets. Guess what causes the bells to ring? Tiny breezes. Sneezing goats, curious children, your own subconscious fidgets. You sit, you breathe, you itch. The first bell rings at 12 minutes in. A passing priest sneezes into his sleeve and chuckles apologetically. "Bless me," he murmurs. The sand flips again. This punishment is based on the idea that inner stillness must be matched by physical calm. That true regret cannot be expressed through movement. It's meditative. In the same way a mosquito trapped in your turban is meditative. By bell 4, your knees have entered the bargaining phase of pain. Bell 6 brings a kind of clarity or delirium, it's hard to tell. You begin to feel your heartbeat in your eyelids. At one point, you wonder if the bells are alive. Eventually, finally someone snuffs the incense. That's the signal your sitting of stillness is over. You stand up, but your legs remain seated. A boy helps you wobble away like a heron who's forgotten how knees work. A warm bowl of lentil stew waits nearby. You eat. You reflect. You hope tomorrow brings something less symmetrical. But then again, there's always the coffee trials. You awaken before dawn, ears still echoing with phantom bell chimes. Your legs feel like they've survived a wrestling match with a basket of wet laundry. And yet, you rise. Today you've been summoned as an observer, again, lucky you. You're told to report to the eastern courtyard where the morning air is steeped in the smell of roasting barley and eucalyptus sap. It's time for the coffee trials. Now, before you conjure up visions of espresso duels or latte art competitions, let's clear the beans. These trials are not about drinking coffee. Not entirely, anyway. They're about truth extraction. See, in 12th century Ethiopia, coffee isn't just a beverage, it's a ritual, a diagnostic tool, a sacred bridge between the soul and confession. And during judicial proceedings, it's wielded with more care than a sword. Here's how it works. An accused person is brought before the elders not with manacles, but with a ceremonial tray of buna, 3 tiny cups precisely prepared. Each round of coffee is brewed with escalating intensity, not in flavor, but in symbolism. The first cup is called abul. It's the greeting mild comforting, laced with roasted barley. The second tona is deeper, smokier, meant to stir the tongue. The third baraka is bitter as old secrets and served only if truth remains elusive. You watch as a merchant accused of shorting grain measurements sits cross-legged before the brewmistress, an older woman with hands like polished wood and an eyebrow that sees all. She prepares the beans with the deliberation of a priest handling relics. There's a reason for this performance. Historians still argue whether the coffee trials were a genuine method of social truth-telling, or a type of caffeine-induced placebo psychology, a gentler sort of polygraph flavored with ritual and societal pressure. Whatever the mechanics, it works more often than not. The merchant sips the abul. He says nothing, just shrugs. Tona arrives. He clears his throat. Starts to explain the weights were warped by humidity. Maybe the millet was fluffy. The elders raise a single eyebrow, a gesture that could flatten armies. Finally, Baraka, he drinks. Silence. Then it spills out. He confesses not just to underweighing millet, but also to charging 2 separate customers for the same sheep hide, and borrowing his cousin's wife's ox and pretending it was his own. A stream of minor sins gurgles out with the final sips like a kettle whistling from guilt. The punishment, not lashing, not exile. He's ordered to host 3 public feasts for the families he deceived with millet from his own storehouse and songs praising the original ox's true owner. A punishment that's social symbolic and entirely edible. You can't help but smile. This system, it's like reality television for monks. But your amusement is short-lived, because someone whispers your name. It's your turn, again. You're ushered to a smaller space, a quiet alcove off the main path. The walls are smooth basalt, cool to the touch. A single mat lies on the floor beside a jug of water and a bowl of sour porridge. You recognize this, the solitude hour. Technically, it lasts 3 hours. But no one wants to call it that because it scares newcomers. Here you're left completely alone. No bells, no chanting. Just you, your thoughts, and the occasionally suspicious sound of mice playing tag near the thatch. The purpose to reflect deeply on the why behind your original offense. In your case, forgetting to bow correctly during a communal psalm. A small mistake. But in this world, ritual gestures are part of the social contract. As you sit, you try to recall what distracted you. Maybe it was that boy with the lemur on a leash, or the echo in the chamber, or your own ego trying to shortcut the sequence. It's odd, this silence. It opens up space in your mind you didn't know existed, and then it fills it with fragments, that merchant's cracked fingernails, the scribe's ashamed shoulders, the girl reciting scripture from memory while picking fleas from her brother's tunic. Eventually you drift into something like sleep, or meditation, or maybe just the existential fog that arrives when a sour porridge sits too long in your stomach. When the guard returns, he doesn't speak, just offers you a cloth to wipe your face and a card with your next appointment, the trial of reversal. You groan. This one's known. You're led to a space where everything is upside down. Not literally, but every action must be performed backwards, walking in reverse, reciting your statement from end to start wearing your robe inside out. The idea is to remind you of how easy it is to disrupt sacred flow, that even well-meaning actions, if done in the wrong order, unravel peace. You're given a task, prepare a ceremonial meal, but backwards. You must serve the food before it's cooked, say the blessing before setting the table, and fetch water after it's already been poured. This sounds ridiculous, and it is, but it's surprisingly effective. Every misstep, every backward motion jars your brain out of its rhythm. You fumble, you spill, you burn your thumb on uncooked lentils, don't ask how. Eventually, a priest steps in and gently corrects you. You must walk in time, not over it, he says, eyes twinkling. It's poetic and confusing, and somehow it sticks. By sunset, you've completed your reversal, and you're exhausted in a very specific way. The kind of tired that wraps around your spine and hums lullabies to your shoulders. A fig cake is placed in your hands. You weren't expecting dessert, but here it is. Warm, crumbly, just a hint of cinnamon. You sit on the bench where the ink-cloaked scribe once sat. You chew slowly, watching as the merchant from earlier prepares grain for his feast. He catches your eye and grins sheepishly. You nod. Because somehow this all works. Dawn again. Your legs ache, but in that oddly satisfying way, like you've earned the pain. The punishment system here isn't about bruises. It's about shifts, subtle sideways changes in how you see the world. But don't get smug just yet. Today, you're about to experience something altogether stranger, the donkey mirror judgments. You arrive at the southern courtyard. This area is less formal than the others, more grass, fewer robes, and the unmistakable scent of warm hay, mixed with some, let's say, biologically assertive aromas. In the middle of the yard stands a donkey. Just one. Unbothered. Chewing with existential boredom. Now, this is not just any donkey. This donkey is a mirror, not literally reflective, but symbolically so. In 12th century Ethiopian court tradition, certain minor offenses, vanity, rudeness, excessive sarcasm, are met with what's called a behavioral reflection trial. The accused must interact with the donkey for an hour, under observation. Why? Because donkeys don't lie. They react authentically. And watching someone's dynamic with a beast that can't be sweet-talked or bullied reveals more than any testimony could. Are you too aggressive, too smug? Are you unable to connect? Do you get annoyed when it doesn't obey? A young man is already mid-trial when you arrive. He's pacing, trying to coax the donkey into performing a simple task, walking a few steps, turning left, stepping over a stick. But the donkey just chews. Occasionally flaps an ear. The young man gets flustered, then angry. He stamps his foot. The donkey turns its back to him and lets out an astonishingly timed fart. From behind a woven screen, two older women take notes on wax tablets. You suppress a laugh which earns you a glance. Then it's your turn. You're not given instructions, just a soft nudge forward and a gesture toward the donkey. You kneel beside it, say hello. It ignores you. You offer it a withered leaf from your robe's pocket. It sniffs you suspiciously, then licks your elbow. You sit quietly beside it for a while. And that's when you realize this isn't a test about control, it's about presence. Can you just be with a creature that demands nothing from you and gives even less? The donkey eventually lays down beside you. That's apparently enough. Your observers nod. Now it's time for the word reversal walk, which sounds like a failed party game but is surprisingly profound. It's another form of behavioral correction for those guilty of careless speech gossip, flattery for personal gain, and interrupting elders mid-story. You, as someone who once described a monk's singing voice as an acquired taste qualify, you're told to walk the full length of the monastery's outer wall about a mile, while reciting every sentence you can remember saying yesterday in reverse order. Not backward syllables. Just the sequence of thoughts. Last thing you said, then the one before that, and so on. Unraveling your own day like a tapestry being gently pulled thread by thread. It's harder than it sounds. You forget things. Then you remember things you wish you hadn't said. That time you corrected the bread steward about grain ratios. That joke about the scribe's ink-stained toes. That weird moment you described goat stew as emotionally confusing. It hits you, words linger. They plant seeds, they hang around in people's minds like smoke. And in this community where memory is valued as currency, careless speech isn't just rude, it's social vandalism. You reach the end of the wall in a strange haze. A monk greets you with a cup of lukewarm honey water, and one simple question: what will you say differently tomorrow? You don't answer. But the question follows you. Your next punishment is less philosophical, the thread binding. This one is beautiful and infuriating. You're tasked with untangling an enormous ball of knotted thread, dyed in vibrant shades of indigo, rust, and ochre. It's been intentionally tangled by someone with the patience of a saint and the wickedness of a trickster god. Why? Because you broke communal rhythm, an invisible offense that occurs when you disrupt the flow of daily life. Talking too loudly during dawn prayers. Walking against the clockwise pattern during courtyard sweeps. That time you sneezed during the quiet meditation bell. In this society, harmony is sacred, and when you disrupt it, you fix it by unraveling. So you sit under a jacaranda tree, slowly loosening each knot. It's meditative and maddening. You learn quickly that yanking only tightens the mess. That subtlety wins. That patience isn't about waiting, it's about attending. It takes hours. By the time the ball is completely undone, your fingers are pricked, your back aches, and your mind is strangely clear. You're thanked with a single thread wrapped gently around your wrist. A reminder. But you're not done. There's still one punishment left for today. The market of echoes. It's not a real market, it's a performance. A ritual play where everyone in the court takes on the role of the person they believe you affected with your actions. You sit on a low stool in the center. One by one, people come up and portray versions of themselves, or you mirroring how your missteps rippled through the day. An old woman mimics how you accidentally blocked her path when you lingered at the spice table. A child imitates your impatient tone during laundry duty. Even a goat is brought out just to remind you that it too is part of the rhythm. It's exaggerated, a little silly, but powerful, because it forces you to see yourself refracted through others. Historians debate whether this ritual had its roots in ancient performance traditions or evolved as a blend of court and theater in isolated regions of the Ethiopian highlands. But regardless of origin, its impact is clear. When the final actor, a novice monk who walks like you and even mimics your annoying cough, finishes, the elder, overseeing the session, simply says, "You've seen your shadow. Now return to your light." You're free to go. You limp home. Not because of physical pain, but because your brain feels like it's been reorganized by polite gremlins. You lie down on your straw mat, listen to the wind hum against the thatch, and, for the first time in days, you fall asleep without dreaming of bells. When dawn nudges you awake, you don't rise with dread. Oddly enough, you're kind of curious about today. You've grown used to the strangeness, to the slow pace of these punishments that feel more like peculiar rituals than justice as you once knew it. And that curiosity is good because today brings the banana skin court. No bananas involved. Unfortunately, the term is metaphorical, a sort of inside joke among the clergy. It refers to infractions that are slippery by nature, actions that aren't clearly right or wrong, but leave people tumbling into awkward consequences. Think sarcastic blessings, passive-aggressive offerings at prayer, or politely declining someone's chili paste and then later asking for more. Petty, confusing human. So how do you punish gray zone behavior with performance? And audience participation. You're brought to a small amphitheater, an open-air circle carved from red stone with smooth seating around the edge. Today, your trial will be a playback tableau. In this, witnesses reenact your behavior from memory in slow, silent gestures, and you must narrate their emotions as they do it. It starts with a monk mimicking your overly dramatic sigh when the broom was too short. He raises invisible eyebrows. Another gestures the exact hand flick you gave the spice jar when someone asked if you were done. And here's the kicker: you're not allowed to defend yourself. Only to name what the other person might have felt. Dismissed, you say. Annoyed, invisible, entertained, but not included. There's no scorekeeping. Just long silences and the occasional nod from the elder judge who chews roasted chickpeas like a metronome. You don't realize how deeply this cuts until it's over. Not from shame, but from seeing how small things grow roots in others. Later that afternoon, you're guided to another corner of the compound. This time for something unexpectedly poetic, the broken pot walk. It's exactly what it sounds like. You're handed a clay vessel with a deliberate hairline crack enough that water will leak from it slowly. Your task is to walk a winding garden path for a full hour, refilling the pot at a spring at each lap. It's a punishment for wasted resources or carelessness with communal supplies. Yesterday, you spilled some precious oil while fidgeting during candle prep. But this isn't really about restitution. It's about mindfulness through futility. You carry the pot carefully, water dribbling out as you go. Each lap you watch the trail darken with moisture. Eventually, it begins to sprout tiny green shoots where herbs and wild onion seeds have been scattered ahead of time. Ah, of course. Your waste becomes someone else's growth. But only if you walk the path slowly, consistently. At the end of your hour, your feet muddy and your arms tired, a small child hands you a sprig of fresh basil. She giggles and scampers off. It's not an absolution, just a gentle acknowledgement that you're learning. Then it's time for what you've secretly been dreading, the dust chant. Everyone talks about it in hushed tones, not because it's harsh, but because it's embarrassingly revealing. The chant is a kind of confessional poem composed on the spot by the punished party about themselves in the third person. The twist, it must be sung aloud, not beautifully, just sincerely. You're seated on a mat in front of a cluster of acolytes and you're told to begin. The structure is fixed one line for each sense, one for an emotion, and one metaphor. So you begin haltingly. He heard his own voice, louder than it should have been. He saw the look that said, "Not again." He tasted shame in the bread he baked. He touched too many things that weren't his to guide. He smelled the smoke of someone else's silence. He felt like a bell rung before dawn. He was a shoe left outside during rain. It's silly, and yet weirdly moving. No one laughs. One monk even hums along by the end. You're allowed to return to your corner afterward where the sky is shifting orange. But you're not done yet. Before sunset, you're escorted to a quiet chamber where the sentence of seeds is passed. This one's earned by those who misjudge others too quickly, jumping to conclusions, assuming intent, dismissing nuance. Like that time you thought a novice was avoiding work when he was fasting in silence. Oops. The punishment sorting seeds. You're given a massive mixed bag of teff, barley, millet, and pebbles, all roughly the same size. You're expected to sort them into neat bowls by dusk. But here's the twist, some seeds have been dyed to look like others. So you must test, smell, feel, bite gently, ask for help even. It's not speed that earns you praise here, it's care. Recognition that things are rarely what they seem at first glance. That every mistaken judgment slows everyone else down. At some point, the elder who caught you misjudging that fasting novice sits beside you and silently helps. Together you finish just as night falls. You look at your hands. They're grain-dusted, trembling slightly, but steadier than they were this morning. And in the silence between tasks, you realize these punishments haven't broken you. They've recalibrated you. Like tuning an old lyre no one had touched in years. Tomorrow will bring new rituals, but tonight you sleep. Not as the person who arrived, but as someone softer, more absurd, and somehow more whole. You wake up to the unmistakable smell of roasted coffee beans and burning frankincense. Morning in the compound doesn't rush you. It just surrounds you. Gentle hands pass you a piece of flatbread. Someone sets down a carved wooden cup of tea EJ that fizzes gently with wild honey fermentation. But your mind is already on what's next, the mirror bowl. This is one of the rare punishments not issued by elders or courts. It's self-initiated. You've heard whispers of it since your arrival, those who feel they've wronged someone without being caught. Who choose to make amends before anyone points a finger. There's a kind of soft power in that facing the consequence before the judgment. You approach the sanctuary steps and ask humbly for the mirror bowl. It's a wide ceramic basin filled with still water placed in a dimly lit alcove, so the only thing reflected is your own face. You're left alone with it for as long as needed. The task is this: tell the water what you almost did. You sit cross-legged. The floor is cool against your skin. The air smells of cedar and warm earth. You lean forward, whispering to the reflection about that moment you could have taken the better blanket. When you notice someone struggling with their bundle but looked away, when the jealousy flared at another's praise, it's not confessional in the Western sense. It's about witnessing yourself. And if you cry, good. The tears ripple the water. The distortion is the point. Some stay 10 minutes, others 2 hours. You're not timed. Only when the water settles again and you see yourself clearly are you permitted to leave. No applause, no penance, just presence. By late morning, you're summoned to something more tactile, the palm fiber circle. At first glance, it looks like arts and crafts. But don't be fooled. This task has teeth metaphorically and literally, you'll see. The punishment is for interrupting others, whether in arguments, lectures, or quiet moments. You've interrupted a monk mid-sentence yesterday. Not maliciously, just impatience bubbling out. Now you're weaving. Palm fibers are soaked until pliable, then dried until prickly. Your task is to twist them into a continuous ring, no knots, no breaks. Every time a strand snaps, you must begin again. And every snapped piece you're required to tuck under your belt and carry all day. Interruptions made visible. But it gets better or worse. Once your ring is finished, you must wear it as a headband for the rest of the day. The fibers itchy. The message clear. Every time someone sees it, they're allowed to speak uninterrupted for 1 full minute in your presence. Some use the time to tell jokes. Others offer compliments. One acolyte recites a slow poem about snails for precisely 59 seconds. You're not allowed to react, respond, or shift position during their minute. It's oddly hard. You learn that listening, really listening, requires its own muscles. By mid-afternoon, you're aching for something physical. Good thing then that the balancing stones are next. Punishment for causing imbalance, social, emotional, or literal. Like when you hoarded the last of the butter without asking. A ripple effect through breakfast morale. You're taken to a wide courtyard, scattered with flat stones. Your job: build 3 towers of 5 stones each, no adhesives, no tricks. Just balance. The catch: you must do it with one hand tucked into your sash. The other hand, your less dominant one, is your only tool. This is frustratingly difficult. The sun beats down. Your tower tips over for the 3rd time. You want to curse? You don't. But slowly, stone by stone, you start to listen to the weight, to feel the texture. You notice tiny notches where one rock fits against another. You realize it's not about perfection, it's about attention. Historians still argue whether this punishment originated in courtly settings or among rural monastic communities. But everyone agrees the towers were less about shame, more about remembering how fragile order can be. By the time you finish, your fingers are raw, but your mind steady. Aligned, slightly sunburned. You're allowed a break after this. A small gourd of cool water. A smear of honey paste on your wrist to ease the sting. And just when you think the day's over, you're summoned to one final task. The pen of straw, a literal one. This punishment is given to those who manipulate others with words, gossip, clever lies, or excessive flattery. You were caught embellishing a story about a fellow novice's mistake. Just a little flair for entertainment, but here that counts. You're given a pen made of dried straw and goat hair thread, and a sheet of bark paper. Your task: write down only facts about your own week. No embellishment, no adjectives, no interpretations. Try it. It's shockingly hard. You begin. I arrived 3 days ago. Fine. I was given a corner mat. Okay. I laughed when someone dropped a bowl. Wait, is that a fact? Or an implication? You start over. You're not allowed to show your writing to anyone. But at the end, you're told to crumple the sheet, burn it, and scatter the ashes in the garden. Words return to dust. You go to bed that night thinking of all the things you didn't say. How quiet can be a kind of power, too. As you lay back under your linen sheet, the night sounds wrap around you: frogs. Somewhere near a well, the slow beat of a pestle from the kitchen, distant laughter. You smile. In this place, even punishments are strangely kind. Not soft, but kind. Tomorrow will bring more lessons. But tonight, you sleep knowing you're slowly becoming someone even your mirror bowl might admire. The sun filters softly through the narrow slits of the stone windows, casting long, thin bands of light across the cool floor. You rise, still feeling the mild ache in your fingers from balancing stones and the faint sting of straw pen cuts on your palm. This morning, the compound feels quieter, almost reverent, as if it's holding its breath before the next ritual begins. Today's punishment is one you didn't quite expect: the silent bell. You're led to a small courtyard surrounded by high walls draped in creeping vines, the air perfumed with hints of myrrh and basil. In the center stands a bronze bell, suspended from an ornately carved wooden frame. But here's the catch. This bell has been carefully muted by wrapping its clapper in soft cloth. It hangs heavy and silent, a kind of solemn reminder. The offense. Speaking out of turn during council meetings. You know the one you once blurted a question just as the elder was delivering a slow, measured parable? The silent bell punishment requires you to wear a slender bronze ring on your finger for a full 3 days. This ring has a tiny chain attached ending in a small bell, the one you can't ring. Your task: walk quietly wherever you go, aware of the sound. You're not making the bell that never chimes. It's a peculiar exercise in restraint and self awareness. Whenever you feel the urge to interrupt or speak prematurely, you gently tug the chain, reminding yourself to pause. You soon discover the unexpected wisdom in this. People begin to treat you differently, sensing your deliberate silence. Conversations slow down around you. Others speak more thoughtfully. You realize the punishment isn't just about silencing, it's about listening. Waiting, letting words grow ripe before they fall. Historians still argue whether the silent bell's origins lay in royal courts or among monastic communities where speech was considered sacred and rare. But what's clear is that this punishment teaches patience as a form of respect. After your 3 days with the silent bell, you find yourself more mindful, almost savoring the quiet moments between words. The world feels less like a shouting match and more like a gentle song. Later that day, you are introduced to another unusual punishment tied to mishandling hospitality. In the 12th century Ethiopian courts, refusing guests or neglecting to offer proper refreshments was a serious social offense. The punishment? The water pouring ceremony. You're guided to a stone basin filled with cool spring water. Your hands are cupped carefully beneath a small clay spout, and you must pour water over the feet of each visitor who enters the courtyard for an entire afternoon. The catch? You must do this silently without missing a single guest and without spilling a drop. At first the task feels tedious, but you soon discover a rhythm. The water cools your hands and feet, the guests smile gently, and there's a deep sense of humility in serving so attentively. The entire ceremony is wrapped in silent grace, a wordless apology and reconciliation. You notice the contrast to the loud bustling outside the court walls where markets thrive on shouting vendors and hurried transactions. Here, every gesture carries weight, every drop of water a promise of peace. That evening, you gather with a few other novices around a fire to hear tales of past punishments, some practical, others almost mythical. One elder recounts the story of the crocodile mask, worn by those who broke promises of loyalty. The mask, carved from dark wood and painted with vivid ochres, was said to inspire both fear and respect. Wearing it meant the wearer was marked as a creature of caution, a reminder to others that trust had been fractured. Historians still argue whether the crocodile mask was a literal item worn in public or more symbolic used in secretive ceremonies. You smile to yourself thinking of how every punishment here feels more like a lesson, a story told in stone water and silence rather than harsh words or chains. As night falls, the courtyard is bathed in moonlight, the shadows of vines dancing like whispers. You lie back on your mat, the memory of cool water on your hands lingering. You feel a quiet pride in this slow transformation. Here, punishment is less about pain and more about becoming learning the fragile art of balance, silence, and service. And with that comforting thought, you drift again into the gentle embrace of sleep. You wake to the faint scent of frankincense curling through the morning air, mingling with the faint hum of distant prayers. Today's lesson is something you didn't anticipate: a punishment that's as much about humility as it is about spectacle, the feathered cloak. The court elders explain that this particular punishment is reserved for those who have acted with excessive pride or arrogance, offenses that disrupt the delicate balance of respect that holds the court together. Instead of a fine or a public scolding, you are given a cloak woven from fine cloth but heavily adorned with brightly colored feathers, each one carefully plucked from the birds native to the highlands. The cloak is beautiful, almost dazzling in its brilliance, but here's the catch: the wearer must parade slowly through the palace corridors for an entire day, while maintaining perfect composure and grace, despite the eyes of everyone fixed on them. The feathers are said to symbolize both the wearer's burden and the weight of their vanity made visible. As you move, you feel the light brush of feathers against your cheeks and shoulders, a constant reminder that humility is a garment far more fitting than pride. The slower your steps, the more time the onlookers have to reflect on the meaning behind this gentle, colorful penance. You catch the whispers of courtiers debating the origins of this feathered tradition. Some say it was inspired by ancient animal symbolism, where birds represented the soul's need to shed arrogance before it could soar. Others suggest it was a later invention meant to soften punishments with visual poetry rather than pain. Either way, the quiet dignity required to wear the cloak turns what could be embarrassment into a meditative act. By the end of the day, you notice your own thoughts have shifted. You begin to understand that pride is best laid aside like feathers before flight. Later, you're introduced to a related but more physical punishment called the stone circle walk. This one is used for those who have disrupted communal harmony gossipers or quarrelsome individuals who stir unrest. The court arranges a circle of smooth stones around the main courtyard. You must walk barefoot around this circle slowly and deliberately, balancing a small basket of herbs on your head. The herbs are chosen for their calming scents, lavender, myrrh, and sage, and the act itself is designed to bring focus and peace to a troubled mind. Walking the stone circle is harder than it looks. The stones are uneven, some slick with moss, and your bare feet feel every contour. It demands patience and attention, like a slow-motion dance with nature and discipline. If you falter or drop the basket, you must begin again. You realize this punishment is less about pain and more about training the body and mind to find equilibrium. The soothing aroma of the herbs seeps into your skin, and with every step, your thoughts grow quieter. Historians still argue whether the stone circle was a formal punishment or a meditative practice later adapted as correction. But regardless, its power lies in its gentle insistence on mindfulness. As the sun begins to lower, casting amber hues over the courtyard, you think back to the feathered cloak and the stone circle. Both remind you how the court's punishments are crafted with a kind of poetic justice, less about inflicting suffering and more about inviting reflection. That night, as you settle beneath a canopy woven from indigo fabric, you feel an unfamiliar calm, like the soft flutter of feathers or the steady rhythm of footsteps on stone guiding you toward something quieter. You breathe deeply and prepare for whatever lessons tomorrow may bring, knowing they will unfold slowly like the pages of an ancient illuminated manuscript. You begin the day in a dimly lit chamber, where the walls are hung with tapestries depicting great Ethiopian kings and saints, their faces calm but stern. Here, the punishment you will witness today is as much about public service as it is about correction, the garden of contemplation. This peculiar sentence involves tending to a small walled garden inside the palace grounds. Not just any garden, but one filled with aromatic herbs, delicate flowers, and medicinal plants, many known only to local healers. The offender is tasked with weeding, watering, and arranging the plants for an entire week, often accompanied by a quiet scribe who notes their progress and reflections. You watch as the punished courtier kneels by a patch of lavender and mint fingers, gently coaxing the soil. There is something oddly peaceful about this task, despite its origin as a punishment. The garden's fragrance fills the air with subtle notes of chamomile and myrrh, offering a kind of natural calm that contrasts sharply with the stern tone of the court. The elders explain that this punishment serves a dual purpose. The offender learns patience and care, while the garden itself benefits, providing fresh herbs for the royal kitchens and healers. It's an exercise in humility, reminding one that even the most delicate plants need tending, much like the relationships within the court. You overhear the court herbalist mentioning an intriguing theory. Some believe the Garden of Contemplation ritual originated from ancient monastic practices where tending gardens was seen as a pathway to spiritual enlightenment. Others argue it's a uniquely Ethiopian innovation, blending punishment with practical cultivation. As you observe, you notice that the garden is divided into sections, each one symbolizing a different virtue: honesty, patience, kindness, and wisdom. The punished individual must spend extra time in the section representing the fault that brought them here. For example, a gossip might be assigned to the honesty patch, cultivating rue and sage. Interestingly, some courtiers seek this punishment voluntarily when tensions rise, using it as a form of sanctioned meditation to restore balance to their minds in the court. The week passes slowly, the rhythms of planting and pruning, providing a steady, calming focus. You think about how this punishment transforms physical labor into a gentle ritual, much like the feathered cloak and stone circle walk you encountered earlier. By the end, the garden blooms brighter, and the punished emerges quieter, softened by the act of nurturing life, rather than facing harsh consequences. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective correction comes not from pain, but from quiet care. As the sun dips behind the distant hills, the scent of the garden lingers in your clothes, a fragrant memory of humility cultivated in the heart of the palace. The cool shade of the palace courtyard invites you as the day advances. Now your attention shifts to a curious and much feared ritual, the silent meal. This punishment is less about physical discomfort and more about a strict regimen of silence and solitude during dining. You see the offender seated at a small stone table surrounded by court officials who watch intently but do not speak. The food served is simple, injera bread, accompanied by mild stews and small bowls of honeyed cheese. Nothing extravagant but nourishing enough. The catch. The punished must eat without uttering a single word, making no sound beyond what the chewing and swallowing require. Even the slightest cough or sigh can draw a sharp glance. This ritual enforces restraint and introspection. The courts consider speech a powerful tool, one that can both bind and unravel social ties. Silence then becomes a way to meditate on one's actions and their consequences. It is said that during the silent meal, the offender contemplates every word they have spoken, weighing their importance and impact. The scent of Berber spice and fresh teff fills the air as the offender eats slowly, mindful of each bite. The gentle clatter of wooden bowls and flatbread contrasts with the deep hush, a hush that grows heavier with each passing minute. The elders tell you this form of punishment was once reserved for offenses involving gossip or slander. Silencing the tongue for a day or more was a way to seal the lips and prevent further harm. However, historians still argue whether this practice evolved from earlier Christian fasting rituals or emerged independently within Ethiopian court culture. You learn that the silent meal often includes a strict time frame, sometimes a full day, sometimes several days, during which the offender must also abstain from social interaction, reflecting on the damage their words may have caused. The punishment is considered particularly effective because it can break the cycle of verbal hostility without resorting to physical penalties. Despite its severity, some describe the silent meal as oddly calming. The absence of chatter allows the offender to tune into the sensory experience of eating itself, the taste, texture, and warmth of food, as a form of quiet mindfulness centuries before such concepts gained popularity in other parts of the world. As the meal ends, the offender's eyes are brighter, their posture a bit more relaxed. You get the sense that the silence has served not just as punishment, but as a subtle cleansing. As you step away, the faint aroma of spices and the echo of silent chewing linger, reminding you that sometimes the heaviest punishments are those that ask you simply to listen to yourself. The afternoon sun begins to mellow, casting long amber rays across the polished stone floors as you move into the inner chambers. Here you witness one of the most unusual punishments reserved for more serious offenses: the weight of judgment. The condemned stands barefoot on a finely woven mat, his wrists bound with soft leather cords, and nearby lies a balance scale made of bronze, exquisitely crafted with tiny gilded flourishes that catch the light. The judge's voice is calm but resolute as he announces that the offender's guilt will be weighed not metaphorically but quite literally. A basket filled with precisely measured weights is brought forward, and the prisoner must bear the equivalent weight on his shoulders or back, usually by carrying a heavy wooden yoke or a carved stone block. The load is calibrated carefully not to crush, but to test endurance and humility. This is not about brute punishment, but about making the offender physically and mentally carry the burden of their misdeeds. As the man strains under the weight, the court looks on silently, some nodding, in respect for the prisoner's fortitude, others whispering about the nuances of justice. You note how the balance scale stands as a symbol. Justice demands equilibrium between crime and consequence, yet it is a delicate and deeply personal measure. The air smells faintly of frankincense and dried myrrh, and you catch the soft scrape of sandals on stone as attendants prepare cooling cloths soaked in rose water to soothe aching muscles afterward. This tender care juxtaposes with the severity of the punishment, reminding you that Ethiopian justice, while firm, was never cruel without cause. Interestingly, some fringe accounts describe a ritualistic chanting accompanying this punishment believed to invoke spiritual balance and cleanse the offender's soul. Though scholars debate whether this chanting was widespread or confined to select ceremonies, it adds an almost sacred aura to the act. You wonder how many carried these burdens in silence, reflecting on the weight not just on their backs, but in their hearts. And you imagine how centuries later the symbolism of bearing one's sins might still resonate quietly in these ancient stones. The prisoner's slow, measured breaths and steady steps bring the ritual to a close. As the weight is removed, you can almost hear the invisible scales tipping toward redemption, balancing justice with mercy in the warm Ethiopian light. Evening approaches and the palace shifts into a quieter rhythm. You find yourself drawn to the courtyard where the final form of discipline takes place, the silent reproach. This is a punishment less about spectacle and more about social exile within the court's confines. The offender is not shackled or beaten. Instead, they are cloaked in a simple gray woolen mantle, embroidered with small iron beads that softly clink with every movement, marking them as one who has lost favor. This mantle is both a burden and a sign and emblem of shame, carefully designed to remind everyone of the wearer's transgression without the need for harsh words. The offender moves slowly through the courtyard, the soft rustle of their cloak mingling with the distant murmur of the evening prayers. They are not permitted to speak or interact with others, effectively rendered invisible despite their conspicuous attire. You feel the heavy quietness hanging in the air, broken only by the soft patter of sandals and the occasional whisper of the court ladies gossiping behind latticed windows. It is a punishment that plays on social bonds, stripping away honor and connection rather than inflicting physical pain. The isolation here feels more profound than any lash, a slow fading from the tapestry of court life. Some historians still argue whether this silent punishment was invented by the Ethiopian courts themselves or borrowed from neighboring cultures where silence and exile were common forms of social control. But in this particular court, it carries a distinctive solemnity, almost a sacred rite of penance. As dusk deepens, you watch the offender's slow path, their shadows stretching long and thin on the worn stones, a living reminder that punishment in these courts was as much about restoring harmony as about reprimanding fault. Night has fully fallen now, and the palace rests under a blanket of stars, their cool light filtering softly through the high windows. As the day's punishments close, you reflect on the final and most mysterious aspect of discipline here, the secret rituals that follow. After the formal punishment, certain offenders are brought to the inner sanctum, not for more pain, but for purification and sometimes redemption. You follow silently as a small group carries an accused noble into a dimly lit chamber, filled with fragrant smoke curling from bundles of frankincense and myrrh. The air is thick with ritual chants and Gaia's ancient words meant to cleanse the spirit and mend the social fabric torn by misdeeds. This is punishment and healing intertwined, a reminder that justice here balances mercy with order. There is something strangely soothing in this final act. The offender's head is gently anointed with a blend of herbs known to calm the mind and body, while elders intone blessings to restore harmony to the court and the wider community. You sense that this ritual, though solemn, is a chance for renewal, not just condemnation. Scholars still debate the origins of these purification rites. Some see them as a Christian adaptation, layered upon older indigenous customs, while others suggest they were designed to prevent future dissent by fostering loyalty through spiritual transformation. Either way, they mark the closing of the disciplinary cycle with a note of hope. You notice a subtle smile on the face of one elder as he places a hand on the offender's shoulder, a quiet gesture of forgiveness and an invitation to return. It's a reminder that in these ancient courts, punishment was never the end of the story, but a chapter in a larger narrative of community and continuity. As you step back into the cool night air, the palace looms serene and steadfast, a testament to centuries of tradition, balancing justice ritual and the delicate art of governance. You take a deep breath, letting the calm of this moment settle deep into your bones. And tomorrow, you know the cycle will begin again. Word count 1, 3, 7. Now, slow your breathing and let your mind drift gently away from these tales of old courts and quiet punishments. The palace grows still, the lamps flicker low, and the ancient stones hold their secrets safely for another night. Remember, justice was a delicate dance here, firm but fair, harsh but hopeful. Close your eyes, feel the coolness of the night air fading softly, and let your thoughts settle like the gentle rustle of those gray cloaks moving silently through the courtyard. Tomorrow is a new day, and for now, you are safe. Sleep well and dream softly.